It truly is a pleasure to be here this morning. And my goal this morning was to provide you a little bit of information about what we're doing at Skills for America's Future. And while we work with industries, not just energy and construction, but all across the board in all sectors, I thought it could be an interesting conversation to talk about some of the things that we've learned by working with our industry partnerships between industry and community colleges primarily, but those involve a lot of other partnerships, including organized labor, the public workforce development system, and also to provide some examples of some of the work that we're doing that could be relevant to the energy and construction industry, because I do feel through a number of these partnerships, there's a lot of opportunity to take good things from other industries and other sectors and potentially apply them to your work in general. And then hopefully we'll have a discussion, because as I said, it's always actually more interesting for me to learn from all of you and be able to take that back and share with other folks. So I thought I'd just start out and provide you kind of a little overview of Skills for America's Future and where we live and kind of what our purpose is. So we were formed in 2010, and we came out of an initiative of the White House from the President's Economic Recovery Advisory Board, but it was never meant to be a White House initiative or connected to the current administration. The goal was to have it located somewhere else. So it came to the Aspen Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that has a number of policy programs. Many of you might be familiar with my colleagues in the Workforce Strategies Initiative. They run the Sector Skills Academy and have done an amazing amount of work on industry sector partnerships, a business value toolkit for how you can assess whether your work is actually relevant to the business community. So we came about in 2010. We've been focusing on employer community college partnerships initially for about the first year and a half. We continue to do that work, and we'll also be doing more work moving forward focusing on cities and the role that cities play in developing a workforce that will lead to economic opportunity for all of its citizens. We kind of have four major areas that we're really working with. One is to show that employer community colleges, they matter and they make a difference, and that community colleges have an incredible role to play in improving the economic health and vitality of their communities. And how do we demonstrate and shine a light on the good examples that exist and how other folks can learn from those examples. So as many of you in this audience know far better than I do, employer community college partnerships, business community college partnerships have been happening for a very long time, and yet it seems that from a national perspective, we still don't have a good handle about what's happening locally, and we don't really effectively share that information as well as we can. So our goal was, how do we really shine a light on those promising practices and share that with other individuals, especially other businesses who have been standing on the sidelines in some cases, thinking about getting engaged, but not really sure what that first step is. Second is really looking at the demand-driven capacity of workforce intermediaries. So many of you may already be a part of sector strategies initiatives, your centers for excellence. The role of intermediaries and the glue that really holds many of these partnerships together, and as yet many of you know, where does the funding come from? The funding tends to be really challenging, and braiding together different funding streams, both federal and state and local and from employers, and year after year trying to figure out how to do that to ensure that programs can continue. We've not been very successful figuring out how we identify funding streams that are more consistent over time so that your organizations can grow and build the capacity that they need. So we're very interested in that type of work. That really goes also to the policy change, and that is kind of a personal passion of mine, which is Washington State may have been more successful at this than others, but how do you get employers to stand up for the use of public resources to support workforce development? Regardless of how people feel about whether government should be cut or not cut, we know that the majority of money really is coming from the federal government in many cases to support some of this work, but that money has been decreasing substantially over the last 10 years. And so we have to figure out how to use it well, but also who's going to stand up and say that this is actually helping us meet our needs. And then finally, just raising the profile of the skills issue. And as many of you know, that continues to be a huge debate. There was a New York Times editorial on Sunday that some of you might have seen that said, you know, the skills mismatch is really all a construction of the business community, and it really is not real. And so if you haven't seen it, it's a good article to check out. It certainly is a good conversation starter, if nothing else. But how do we really then talk about the importance of skills, and regardless of whether we think there's skills gap or not, the need to more effectively align skills training with business and industry and with economic development is critically important, and how do we get that conversation started and really move forward. So when we at Skills for America's Future looked at partnerships, as many of you do, we had a lot of business, we had a lot of community colleges, and we had to figure out what buckets to put all these partnerships in. So this was kind of a quick attempt to say that we focused on three main areas. One is those partnerships that actually were leading to the creation of a pipeline of new workers. Businesses were actually industry was interested in hiring, they had jobs open, and I think that's one of the key issues that we've struggled with, is that when you look at the JOLTS report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're still in a situation where we have 3.1 individuals for every job that is open, so we do not have adequate hiring demand. That has been one of the biggest challenges on moving the economy forward. So how do we start to recognize that we do need to increase hiring demand so that we can get folks back to work? So even if we got the skills gap all fixed today and everyone was hired, we'd still have unemployment. So we just don't have enough jobs yet, and we've got to focus on that effort. But we know we do have employers that do have jobs, and we need to talk about those jobs that are open, the industries that those jobs are in, and how we make better connections for people to understand. The second is really focusing on the incumbent workforce. So we know we've got a lot of great people already in the workforce who show up for work, who have skills, but industry is changing very rapidly around them, and how do we work to make sure that those individuals get the skills they need to be able to remain employed and be successful contributors to the workforce. And the third area was kind of like the catch-all bucket that everyone has to have, which is we work with a lot of industry as well that is working in partnership with community colleges, but it's not necessarily leading to a job with that employer or in that industry. They're bringing something else to the classroom. So I would use an example of Accenture, a large consulting firm. Their biggest concern is presentation skills. They feel that students coming out of 2-year and 4-year institutions do not have the presentation skills that are necessary to be successful in the workforce. They felt that that was something they could help community colleges with in particular, and have created relationships to work with students in business programs primarily, but to improve their presentation skills. Students going through that program and taking those courses are not necessarily ending up with jobs at Accenture, but we feel it's something from industry that is helping complement the academic training and technical training that the community college is providing. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of what we've discovered, and I'd love to hear from all of you if you have the same things in Washington State or if these are different things that you've been experiencing. And that is some of the key issues we found when we worked with partnerships. So when we first started, our goal was really to have industry make really hard commitments up front, like you're going to hire X number of people. Well, as some of you know, sometimes that works really well, depending on the industry and the individual business. And sometimes the business just isn't that point yet, but they can get there as long as you meet them where they are. So some of the things that we started with initially was, some very simple things, but yet, while it seems simple, I sometimes wonder why we're always still having some of these conversations, because we think that we should have accomplished this by now. But I'm really impressed by the number of people in the audience who it's their first time attending, which shows that this effort continues to grow and people continue to get engaged. So it makes me think it's simple, but we've still got work to do to get all the individuals and businesses engaged in this effort moving forward. So the key, what is the purpose of the partnership? I think sometimes we come to these conversations and we say, well, we'd like to do X or we'd like to do Y, but we don't really put all the cards on the table. What is it that you, as your organization, needs to accomplish through this partnership? What is it that you have to have? What do you have to prove to your CEO to demonstrate that this is important for us to continue investing in? And being honest about your organization's agenda. Is that hiring people from the industry side? Is it putting together a new curriculum? What is it that you need to show? Because if we don't get that out front, I've seen a lot of partnerships dissolve because people weren't honest at the beginning, including the hardest question, which is where's the money going to come from? And where are the resources going to come from? And can the college, can business and industry put the money in? Are they willing to? I think we've seen that a lot with grants. As we all know, we all need grants for survival, including myself, as we go out for that. But how do we sustain after the grant? And who's going to pay? And is it good enough to have 3 years of really good work to go away when nobody is willing to support it? And I think those are the tough conversations where you see some really good things happen on the ground. People are really positive and excited about that work. And then when it comes to the end of the grant, it's like, okay, now who's going to pony up for the cash? And everyone kind of walks away. And I think we've all been in that situation. We'd all like to see it not occur as often as it does. So being honest about the agenda actually matters. The importance of language. I think we still struggle in some cases and sometimes talk past each other when we're talking about certain issues. So we've kind of struggled in my own work. Do we talk about employers or do we talk about businesses? And I think about employers and I think, well, business isn't in the business of employing people. Business is in the business of making goods and services and products. They're not a generous employer. They employ, and that's great, but that's not their primary purpose. So should we use business versus employer? Career ladders versus employee retention. I've met a lot of businesses who the idea of career ladders kind of goes over their head. They're like, I really need to know how I can keep my workforce, and I want to reduce my costs, and if I can have people stay with the right skills, that's where I want to be. And then the whole institutional terms, credit versus non-credit, certifications, not having certifications. I've worked with a number of community colleges in the Midwest who are actually struggling right now about the conversation with employers around national certifications and whether or not those national certifications have value to those employers. The employers in some of these communities not as interested about the certifications and the credentials, yet from the college side, very interested for the individual, for the value that that individual will have to show that they have skills, something that's portable. So how do we put that together? That may not necessarily be true here, but I've heard it from some businesses who have said, if I'm not part of the conversation about developing this credential, I'm not really sure that it means that much to me. So we're trying to figure out, what is it, the conversation that needs to occur? Because certainly there's a huge push at the national level on the importance of portable credentials, on the value of things like the National Association of Manufacturers Skills Certification System and other good credentials we know are out there that a number of people in business and industry value, yet we've seen some challenges, especially working with some of the smaller and mid-sized employers who are not really sure whether that meets their needs. Also, I think the meeting structure, we've seen a lot with our businesses that we've worked with on the importance of being solutions-oriented first, that they really want to see a really tight agenda about, we already know the problem, how are we going to solve the problem, what are the steps we're going to do, and what are the milestones we're going to benchmark ourselves against going forward. So I think that's also critical as well. Other key issues, confidentiality. We've been working with a lot of employers, and I think they're really great partnerships, as I'm sure you have many in this room. Colleges and the centers of excellence probably have wonderful dialogue with their business and industry. Obviously, when you get those good trust relationships, there's information that is proprietary that is shared that you want to be able to keep confidential. I think commitments is another key thing, and as I said, we really struggled at the beginning to get some commitments from some business and industry, but then what we found was, the importance of meeting the business and industry where they were. So I would give an example. We worked with a large nonfiction media company, and what was their best thing to do was their core competency, which they could do public service announcements on the importance of community colleges for getting your education, on the importance of the skilled trades, and how we get people to change the perception about some of the jobs that we couldn't get people to go into as easily. And that was great, and that was important. And then we started talking to the hiring managers in certain departments, and they're like, yeah, we could really use some interns. And there's this community college right down the street, literally in walking distance. There had been no relationship. You walk 3 blocks. And there they are, and here's this great community college, well-respected, lots of good programs. The hiring managers are like, yeah, I could really use a community, a student, and interesting, I think they actually have a program that works for us, that makes sense. So they started talking, and yeah, they had this program, isn't it great? They're like, okay, we'll take 3 interns. Super, that was a huge, if we had every business and industry take 3 interns, we'd solve our problem of not having enough job experience for all our new workers. So that would be a good thing. So 3 interns, super, company loves the interns. Miraculously, they were all amazed that community college students had all the right skills that they needed, because previously they thought they only came from 4-year institutions. Why, I do not know. I'm like, they can come from all over. And what did they do? They hired them all. Full-time, with benefits, with a living wage. Had we started there and said, we really want you to take on interns and this is what you should do, they would have walked away from the table. They were not ready for that conversation, but slowly through the great work of the community college and the folks who could really sell their students, they were able to get this large Fortune 500 business to say, you know what, we can pull from 4-year institutions and that's important, but we can also identify talent at community colleges. And for a couple of these community college students, they're going on to 4-year institutions and the company is paying their tuition, which is an ultimate win for everyone involved. And for these students, all 3 of them were the first in their families to go to college. So it was really quite a success on that part. Clearly, understanding that businesses are already investing in their workforce. I think we hear this a lot. Sometimes during the conversations, there's not a recognition that they may not be doing what you want to do with your partnership, but they are making investments already and understanding what those investments currently are. And whether it's on their incumbent workforce, whether it's training entry level or mid-level management folks, but really understanding and making them aware that you understand they're already putting resources in and some type of recognition. And then of course the importance of labor market information, and I'm sure many of you are using some of the tools that are already out there. More and more tools are becoming available that are really looking at real-time labor market information, whether it's through EMSI, which is now part of Career Builder, or whether it's through Burning Glass. There are a number of tools out there that are really helping to say what's happening in the labor market now, which is critical because we've always had that problem of being kind of looking at lagging information as opposed to leading information. So technology is slowly helping with that. I think from our perspective, also when we've talked to businesses about, what's their concern when they think about how to engage in these partnerships, one has been, they continue at least the ones we talk to, continue to talk about the challenge of a skills mismatch, that they do have jobs open, that the folks they're having come to apply for these jobs are not meeting their needs. And so how do we better, focus on that? At the same time, I think we do have to understand, especially with the big companies, that they are using applicant tracking systems, and many would say that, they are putting in the ideal candidate that very few of us would probably meet. Right? And even if they put their own staff through their applicant tracking system, they probably wouldn't come out getting their jobs. And there have been some interesting, research that has been done where people have done that, and they've looked to say that, yeah, my current engineers would not be able to qualify for what I've put into this system. So there's that combination of also, versus, are we setting up, having the ideal candidate versus, are we really recognizing that folks do have skills and that they can learn, and that sometimes with additional training, they'll be excellent workers. We're also seeing, that challenge with the workforce pipeline. Obviously, our demographics are not necessarily in our favor. As we talked about earlier this morning, a number of baby boomers will be retiring, especially in the energy industry. You see large numbers of folks. I know some in the energy industry have referred to it as the silver tsunami coming, and folks are just going to nicely, although hopefully we will not all be silver, but I don't know, I seem to be heading there very quickly, but even before retirement yet. But I think that's going to be a real challenge, is that in this industry, in some of these industries, we still have a huge perception problem, that students are not looking at these industries as great careers. They're not recognizing what they're like now in 2013 versus in 1970, that it's a different work environment. These are good jobs, good paying jobs, and we need to be able to change that perception, and we need business and industry to help us do that. I don't think the education institutions can do that solely on their own, but they need to have folks willing to talk about what the opportunities are and what the careers are moving forward. I think I've heard from business and industry, as you know, we've talked about this for a long time, and I've been in this work for quite a while, is repeated attempts to solve problems. Like, we've tried this before, we haven't gotten a solution, you're asking for productivity on the side of, you know, my employees to help participate in this. How is this going to be different? And I think, you know, through your centers of excellence here, you've definitely shown that it is different. We're having a different conversation. We're making progress. We can see progress being made, and we see visible outcomes as to what's changing. So we need to make sure we continue to demonstrate that this isn't just a conversation. We're talking about an action-oriented conversation. We're talking about changing the way we do business, both on the employer side and on the college side, and it's going to lead to people having the right skills and credentials that are going to allow them to be successful in our economy, and that is critical. Obviously, key thing, and as all of you, I heard the TACT grants mentioned here earlier, metrics and evaluation is becoming more and more important. You know, it used to be so great when you could apply to foundations and say, I just have a good idea, fund it. Now it's like, I have a good idea, fund it, and show me how this is going to work, and how are you going to prove that you actually make progress. And that gets harder and harder, I think, especially when we're working with human beings. There are a lot of variables. This isn't creating widgets. I would put a plug in for my colleagues at the Workforce Strategies Initiative at the Aspen Institute who have developed a business value toolkit, which is online. And so if any of you haven't seen that toolkit, if you Google Workforce Strategies Initiative, which is a program of the Aspen Institute, and then type into their search engine business value toolkit, you will see a whole set of metrics and questions that you could use to evaluate whether or not your program is offering value to business. So I would encourage you to look at that, because it's a pretty comprehensive tool. I would also say the importance of, you know, we put a lot of emphasis on quantitative and data, and that's all good, and we need to collect better data, but I would put a plug in for not forgetting that qualitative information, how these things are impacting individuals, how this work is impacting your work is equally important, and we need to make sure we can gather that qualitative information as well as the data numbers. Those stories matter. When you make a difference in someone's life, when you make a difference in the way the community college is offering the work that it's doing or its curriculum, we need to capture that, because we don't have those great examples necessarily all at our fingertips. And sometimes we're still in the process of putting in the systems that's going to help us gather the data that we actually need. And we might not be where we want to be, but we know we're moving in the right direction. And so just making sure that the work you do is not going kind of by the wayside and not being captured, because I think we need to do a better job. I get this question all the time. It's kind of the good and bad of living in Washington, which is you've got federal agencies saying, so what's happening in X community or X state? And by the way, how do you know it's good? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I mean, we know it's good. We know there are good things out there, but we don't always have the data. So it's easier for me if I can come to each of you and say, wow, I've been approached about what's happening in Idaho or Montana or Colorado or Washington State. Who can I direct to you, and do you have the data to do it? Will help elevate your own programs as well. So what have we learned in the last couple of years? A lot. There's no question about that. Some good, some not so good. One is, we started out really focusing on business community college partnerships, and we're going to continue to focus on that. But very rarely do any of these partnerships exist without other key partners. So whether that's organized labor, whether that is the workforce investment boards, whether that's community-based organizations, we've got to make sure that we really recognize all of the partners that are engaged in this process, because sometimes some of those other entities seem to get left out, but they're also doing critical roles. We're seeing more and more examples of community colleges working with community-based organizations that are providing some of the employability skills, development, wraparound services that they're most effective in providing, whereas maybe the college, that's not their core competency. So recognizing what's each of our core competencies and how we work together to create a whole system is critical. Pacific Gas and Electric has worked on a program that they call Power Pathways, and that's really been, getting folks interested to go through a process that helps them understand what life is like in the energy industry, and also helps prepare them for their pre-employment tests, because they were having quite a substantial problem of folks passing those pre-employment tests, and it was screening out a lot of people. At the same time, they were also very interested in the diversity of their workforce, which was not representative of the communities in which they were operating. And so the value of really working with community colleges was to be able to identify a more diverse and more skilled workforce for their customized coursework that they were developing. They, Pacific Gas and Electric themselves put together technical support. They've helped with curriculum design with the community colleges, so they've really sat down and talked about what makes sense. And it's not just how to become a worker at PG&E, but they've been, I think, what's been really nice about them is they see success of people going through these programs if they're employed at PG&E, if they're employed within the industry as a whole. So not all companies are as open to, like, if you don't come work for me, it's successful. They actually are viewing that as successful. So even if you go to their, move down to Southern California and head to the other electric company that is providing service there, they are doing co-delivery of classroom instruction, student field visits, in-kind donations of training equipment, employment and or enlistment of additional employers to help with advising and hiring, as well as program management and funding. And they've put financial resources on the table, as well as in-kind contributions through equipment and training. As you can see, it's been pretty successful. 71% of their graduates are hired into the industry, which I think is a pretty great number. 60% are coming from underrepresented communities. So they've also been achieving their goal of diversifying their workforce, which has been important. And they have a 98% retention rate at the company after 6 months. So they're not only getting them, but they're retaining them. And they have really, I think, ramped up this program substantially. They have people on board, multiple people who are now employed by PG&E to ensure that this program is successful. So the company has made a committed investment in terms of their own staff to ensure that this will continue. And I think the other thing is they've really focused on military veterans, so that's been an area for that company that's been particularly relevant considering their location and the number of military veterans that are departing from the military and wanting to reside in California. So they've made a commitment to that as well for their Bridge to Utility Workers programs. And Pacific Gas Electric, like I'm sure a lot of you working in the energy industry, there's been a lot of great work done by the Center for Energy Workforce Development in terms of looking at curriculum overall. And there's some free curriculum that's available on the Department of Energy website as well. So how do we get information out, and how do we get some of these resources more effectively picked up and utilized? Because what we don't want to see is reinventing the same thing over and over again. I think that makes a lot of folks really frustrated. Right, which is, for those of you applying for the TACT grants, that's why you have to share your curriculum, right? So we're not doing this more than one time. Another part, it has to do more manufacturing, is DuPont, which, as all of you know, is a huge company. And this is one of the problems with some of the Fortune 500 companies. They're incredibly decentralized. So if you talk to corporate, they don't necessarily know what's happening at the rest of the plants around the facility. But in this particular facility, which is in West Virginia and Parkersburg, they have a one-year program, which is really a great program that focuses on rotation. So it's 3 months in class and 3 months at the site. It's paid for 50% by the state and 50% by the company. So it is truly a public-private partnership. It's working to prepare chemical process operators in polymers, which is a growing industry in West Virginia. And students will earn a certificate of applied science when they are done, and this is linked into their ability to then pursue a 2-year degree. So it does become a stackable credential. And it provides training in an area where they are increasingly focused on this type of, they have a whole polymer alliance zone in West Virginia. So the West Virginia Parkersburg, which I know does not sound like a community college, but it is a 2-year institution, is now applying this program to 10 other companies in the area. So it's been a really successful way for the community college to interface with not just one company, but multiple companies. And as all of you know, I think that's critically important, that we're not preparing people just with such specific skills. They can only be employed in one company, but a broad enough range of skills that they can move around from company to company, or move around if they find that company goes out of business or downsizes. So we do the best on behalf of the students as well. In DuPont, they started this small. They started with only 40 students, but that was kind of what they could handle internally, and they are committed to increasing that number as they show and demonstrate the success. But I think it's been It also really addresses what we've seen from employers, which is one of the other key issues, which is, do people have work experience? So we're seeing that it's not enough to get the employability skills and the technical skills and the academic skills if you've had no work experience. Those people are still, when you see some research was done, if you don't have that experience, many of the companies are still not that interested in hiring you. So finding out those academic programs at the community college that is really combining both is critical if we're really going to help students be successful. I don't know if any of you are working with Granger at your community colleges, but Granger offers scholarships for students who are interested in the skilled trades, and they define skilled trades pretty broadly. About 50% of these scholarships, which are given to second-year community college students, so they're looking at students who have already made it through the first year, but this will help them with them. It also helps the colleges with your completion goals, if we can make sure these folks actually get through, is to give scholarships to community colleges. Half are offered for military veterans, so this has been another interest because they've seen a lot of overlap in terms of the skills that folks in the military bring to industry, overlap with the skills that are needed by Granger. Granger's a company that we did a roundtable with in February with their CEO, Jim Ryan, who is incredibly committed to the need of the skilled trades to change the perception of employment in the skilled trades. So we did some work with Granger and Pacific Gas and Electric, and many of you may have read Peter Capelli's work. He's a management professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's kind of on the other end of the spectrum, which is it's all business, business stopped training and business stopped investing. So it made for a very good, robust conversation to have business and industry also talk about what they're doing and that they're contributing. As a result of that conversation, we'll have a toolkit that we will put out, which will be online in early September. Hopefully, that will be a partnership guide for the skilled trades and employers in the skilled trades with specific examples as a way that we can really hope to work with Granger to get out as well to students and others that the skilled trades are a great career opportunity, and we want to really find a way that we can encourage more students to do that. There's also some work that Granger's done with the American Association of Community Colleges. If you haven't seen that, there's another toolkit online that they have developed with them, and that can be accessed at the American Association of Community Colleges website. And I'm just going to skip through. There are other examples, but we can save those for another time. The one thing I wanted to focus on was the importance of bringing policy and practice together. As I said at the beginning, that's been a tough, I think at the national level, that's been a tough effort to make sure that we can get employers to talk about, on the policy side, why these partnerships, why your centers of excellence matter to them. What's the benefit? And we really need to find a way to get more employers to talk at not just the local and state level, but also the federal level, because a lot of the funds do start at the federal level and then flow down, whether that is grants offered through the Department of Labor to ensure that through discretionary dollars, these grants like TACT continue. There is certainly, I think, a desire by some in Washington to recognize that TACT, as many of you know, is in the third round. The fourth round is the final round, but there is a desire to potentially keep this type of funding going in some other format. That's going to be really hard to do, I think, unless we have business talk about why this has been valuable to them and what they've gotten out. So we have worked with some other organizations that some of you may be working with, the National Skills Coalition and the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, to identify employers to come together around a pretty general policy platform, and these are kind of our 5 points. One is we do believe that you need to invest more in workforce development, and yes, it does need to be effectively invested, and it should be invested with a focus on what is valuable to employers, what's actually going to help grow the economy and help employers get the workforce that they need. We believe there needs to be more industry-recognized credentials delivered and recognized by the employer. So it's great if we produce them, but we also need the employers to send the signal to the marketplace that I care about this. So if you're an employer and you have credentials that are being developed either nationally or in Washington State. Are these things on your job descriptions? You know, are they incorporated? Would the student know that I want to get this credential from this college or this training provider and it's going to give me a leg up? Or are we still making this a guessing game for individuals, which is really tough to say, do I get this credential? I'm not sure what the value is to the employer. So we need the employers to step up in that area. We also wanted to have been pushing on the need to create regional industry and partnerships. So you've done that here. That's not necessarily true in all states across the country. We need more of these industry partnerships, more of these sector-based partnerships to really serve business and industry needs. We also think we need to help employers partner more with community colleges and other providers, labor management organizations, workforce investment boards. We don't necessarily have a preference. I think you have to look at the assets in your community to determine who the key partners are that you can work with. It's difficult for us to tell you something like that from Washington, D.C., and I don't think we should be. I think we should be looking to all of you. You know your communities far better than we do. And then how do we accelerate hiring? We know that on-the-job training has been something that employers of all sizes have valued, both small, medium, and large-sized employers. We need to be able to accelerate that hiring to really address that importance of getting experience, because that is coming up more and more as, you know, one key issue that folks don't have, which is, that's great, you have technical skills, but you haven't been able to demonstrate that you have competencies, right? So you got the certificate, you got the credential, but I don't know if you can actually do anything. So the only way we're gonna know if they do anything is if we get some work experience, we have some supervisors who can document that. Employers, you could get a try before you buy opportunity, and it's good for the students too, because they can also see whether this is the type of environment I'm comfortable working in or not. So those are like the 5 areas, and we know they're general. We needed to keep them general to keep a large group of us together. If we got too many specifics, we'd all start peeling off when we get down to the details. But the work that you can do here to help really identify those business champions who could be brought to Washington to talk. We need folks to testify all the time, and it's not good if all of you see the same business and industry folks there at the hearings. We need to diversify this and show that there's actually interest in a larger population.